Thank you, everybody. So we are in this space with 150 some models of buildings by a single architect, Le Corbusier. And it's kind of hard, really, to fathom all of them. It's almost overwhelming. And I'm going to talk about a single building. I've worked on this building for 10 years. So you can imagine the depth of information that's here in the room. Right? If one person can spend 10 years on one building, and there are 150 some buildings here, there's an immense amount of energy and knowledge and just like inquisition of trying to figure out what he was up to. I work in 3 areas. I'm a painter, so I work in the arts. I'm an architect, obviously. I'm also a critical theorist. And what this book is all about is bringing those 3 things together. As an artist, we make stuff. And so this question of creativity is always in the front of my head. Like, how do we come up with ideas? Like, how do we make stuff? Like, what does it take to do things? And you're always probably thinking about it every time you draw a line or you build a model or whatever. So really, this is a project about creativity. Trying to figure out, what do artists think about? How do they work? How do they make progress? How do they develop ideas? And all of these kinds of questions. And the critical theory part comes in because I don't believe everything I hear. And the critical theory part is to dig a little bit deeper, to have 3 or 4 things to corroborate stuff. Even things that are said by individual authors like Le Corbusier. He's said a lot of stuff. And he always wrote in a very kind of serious, proclamatory voice. Everything is a proclamation. There's never a question. And so it's easy to kind of get trapped into stuff that he writes. And so I'm interested in checking what he writes against other things he writes, and really mostly against his buildings. So to me, the buildings are the creative thing. So that's what today is a little bit about. And these files are so heavy that it will take a while for them to come on. Okay, so I'll give you a sort of general feel for the building, a little bit of information. And then I'm going to look with you at a series of themes, which I've called them ghosts, because they are truly ghosts. They're not like real things. They are things that one has to, the ghosts of them exist in the work, and you have to dig and try to find them. There's another reason for picking up this title of Ghost. There's a book by Paul Valéry, a French poet, who worked at the same time as Le Corbusier, that Le Corbusier really, really loved, and he annotated this book. And this book is called Upalinos, the Architect, or The Architect. And it's about 2 ghosts from the Platonic dialogues that are talking with one another. And they're discussing the relationship. They're talking about architecture, but architecture for them is like being real, not being a ghost, being real and being able to act in the real world. So this ghost came from there. There are seats all scattered around, so please feel free to come in. I'm looking at 3 seats right up front here. Anybody wants a seat? Come on in. Yep, no worries. Come on. All right, so this project is called the Mill Owners Association Building, the project that I have been studying for years. It is in India, and the star right there is where the building is. It's in the state of Gujarat, in a city called Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad, in the 15th century, there was a king, Ahmed Shah, who selected this place to make a new city and named after him. So the city is really built around this river, the Sabarmati River, and that's the confines of the city. This is the building. Mahatma Gandhi, this is called Gandhi Ashram. So he stayed in Gandhi Ashram during all of the independence movement. So Ahmedabad has a huge part of the Indian psyche. A little more closer to the site, that's the building. It sits right next to the Sabarmati River. That's the Gandhi Ashram, which is a road that Gandhi and all of his followers took during the Salt March in the 30s. So it's a really, really huge thing in the Indian psyche. And to have a site on Gandhi Ashram next to the Sabarmati River was huge. This is the building. It doesn't look like the models here. It's a model we built. Essentially, river on one side, city on the other side. There is a ramp that brings you up from the ground floor to the first floor. So this is a tricky thing in all of the core drawings and in all sort of non-US environments. There's ground floor and then first floor and second floor. So I want to keep that just because that's what I've studied, but it is a little confusing because in the US, what he would call first floor, we would call second floor. He would call ground floor, we would call first floor. All right, so I'm just going to use ground floor, first floor, second floor. So there's a ground floor, first floor, ramp goes up to the first floor, a continuous stair going up, and you can see the floors expressed with the slabs on the side. That's the view from the opposite direction. There's a pretty amazing space under this roof that we will get to. Cafeteria down there, river here, city there. I'll do a quick run through the plans of the building just to kind of orient you to the bits and pieces. So when I get to talk a little bit more about them, you'll know where things are. So this is the ground floor. You can see the ramp is cut, ramp is going up. Stairs exist on this floor. There are two sets of brise-soleil sun shading devices, one here, one here. That's east, west, north, south. This is all modified in the 70s by Doshi, B.V. Doshi, Pritzker Prize winner from a few years ago. He was like 25 or so. He went to Paris and worked in Le Corbusier's office, and then he went with Le Corbusier to India to actually manage his buildings. Cafeteria, this is all open, literally open to air. So the climate, amazing climate of Ahmedabad, Corb wasn't used to this. He was used to cold and snow and all that. And then suddenly he saw, wow, I can just leave places open. So completely open here. Clerical offices here, bathroom, elevator. And just a couple of small images. This is the renovation from the 70s. So this is not Corbusier. That is a view looking at elevator and bathrooms. And this is looking at the cafeteria. I know this is all too much and too fast, but I want to get to, I want to give you just a flavor, and then I'll get to more detail. So that's the first floor, which is really the main floor of this building. Ramp brings you here. You can continue up the stairs. A set of rooms here, president, vice president, 2 secretaries, and a bunch of meeting rooms on the other side. This is also completely open to air. Those are enclosed. These are enclosed. Elevator, bathroom. And so this is a view from here looking that way. You see the bathrooms. That red wall is this wall. So that you're looking at that. That column is that column. This is the second floor, right? First, second, above. So this is really a 4-story building. But in all the paperwork, there's only second floor. That's the highest floor. So that's the second floor. It has a meeting hall here. This is a view of the meeting hall here. It also provides a way to get up to a mezzanine and eventually up to the roof. This is entirely open. Everything here is open to air except inside here. That's what it looks like from the ramp. So you can see the ramp, next to the ramp, sorry. You can see the ramp going up to the first floor. That's the ground floor. And you can see the brise-soleil on the west side of the building. Brise-soleil, sun shading. This is what it used to look like from the riverside. This is a photograph from the 70s by Futagawa. That doesn't exist anymore. The river has been now banked into a concrete river, a concrete bank, and I'll show you images of that. So on the east side, there are vertical and horizontal brise-soleil, and you see all these objects that are essentially in an open space. This is enclosed, that's enclosed, everything else is open. And that's the cafeteria. This retaining wall was built both to be able to make a flat area for parties. This is actually the first sketch that he made. It says garden parties, right? Party animal. But also, of course, to keep the building from eroding from the river. The river was right there. Here, you can see in a season that's very dry, but in wet seasons, the river would be up here, right? It would be full of water. So that's one of the sides of the building. That's the south side, where you can see brick with concrete slabs. So the sides of the building, the north and south side, are two parallel bearing walls, brick bearing walls. And you can see the brise-soleil. All right, so that's about it for giving you a flavor. Now I'm going to get into these ghosts. So the first ghost. The first ghost is the Fondation Le Corbusier, which is the foundation of Le Corbusier Foundation. You know, when we work on projects and things, we would like to rely on sources. They're called primary sources. And one would expect that everything you'd find would be primary. But it's interesting that Le Corbusier already, when he was alive in the 40s, he thought about making the foundation. So it was his idea to make the foundation, which to me might color the way that one produces information that you recognize, yeah, this is going to live forever, right? This is not a sketch I'm making, but it's actually a sketch that's going to be archived forever. So to me, there's a little bit of interest in the making of the foundation. Case in point, he had sketchbooks. They were like roughly this size, and he always had them in his pocket. He made grocery notes, he made like measurements, he sketched in them, he wrote a lot of amazing stuff in them. But they were completely spontaneous, just like whipped down. The sketchbooks were never shared with anybody. Like people in his office hardly ever saw the sketchbooks. If he ever like showed a sketch from his sketchbook to somebody, they would be like, wow, I saw a sketchbook. After his death, they were found in a closet, in a locked suitcase, completely organized, numbered, A1, A2, A3, A4, all the way to T something. So these are the publication of the 4 sketchbooks. The introduction to these sketchbooks, Maurice Besset has written an incredible analysis of the numbering system. So this is not me, but Besset in this case. And the analysis tells you that here's somebody for whom the appearance of organization was really important. Even something that shouldn't have been organized. It's just sketches, right? You just keep it in your pocket and you make stuff. even those for him was important to have the appearance of organization and systematicity. So we will see this in this building, this kind of struggle for Le Corbusier of pure system making. And as architects, we know we have to make systems in buildings. Structures are systemic. Water, waste, air, light, like waste won't go up, it will go down. So there are real things we have to deal with. So you'll see in this building that there are constant struggles between things that he wanted to do aesthetically, spatially, and in terms of light, and the kinds of systems that exist in the building that were constantly pulling on him. Like he would go one way and then back, and then one way and then back. So that's what I'm going to show you in a little bit more detail. But the thought or that idea really started with these. When I read about this numbering system, it was clear, okay, here's somebody who worked so hard to make this look systemic while there was no reason to do it. So that was the first ghost. The second ghost, the political history that surrounds this, which is quite interesting. So British were in India since the 17th century in lots of different ways. And there was a rebellion in 1857 that did two things. One, got rid of everybody else except the British, but at the same time made an independence movement against the British. And this was in the works for roughly 90 years until after the Second World War in 1947, the British decided, okay, India is going to be independent. So it actually resulted in something. In 1947, the British decided that India was going to be split in two pieces. India, and then Pakistan, and what later became Bangladesh in the 70s. So initially, Bangladesh and Pakistan were a part of the split, together a part of the split, but eventually they split. So India, as we know it today, as a democratic environment, really is from 1947. And I mentioned Gandhi before. Gandhi and Nehru worked together in the independence movement. So when India became an independent country, Nehru became the first president of the country. Nehru had a pretty kind of intense work to do. So the country was split based on religion, mostly, and people who used to live here now lived in an Islamic country. And if they wanted to live here, they had to deal with being in an Islamic country. And so a lot of people moved back to India, and certainly people who lived here went to Pakistan. So the identity of the country was in somewhat of a turmoil. And Nehru had to actually figure out a way to bring everybody together. And one of the ways he did this was by introducing this thing which he called a faith in the future. In the same partitioning, Lahore, which used to be the capital of Punjab, ended up on the other side in Pakistan. And Punjab needed a new capital. And there was a thinking by Nehru that they wanted to have an international architect work on this project. And he made a short list of people, selected Le Corbusier as the architect for Chandigarh, which I'm sure all of you know. So the reason for Le Corbusier being in India was to go and work on Chandigarh. Nehru's sister was married to an industrialist with the name of Ute Singh, who lived in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, and was one of the mill owners of Ahmedabad. So Nehru's sister spreads the word that this guy is coming from France, he's an amazing architect, and all the industrial people of Ahmedabad think of giving him commissions. So he gets 5 commissions in Ahmedabad overnight. Of the 5, 1 of them is not built. The other 4, 3 of them are built, and 1 was partially built. And this building is one of those. The one that was partially built was a giant cultural center, only the museum of which is built and is standing today. The other 3, so the museum is a large project. The other 3, 2 of them are residences. So 2 of them are residences, the Sarabhai House and the Shodan House, which originally was the Hute Singh house. Hute Singh decided not to build the house, sold the plan to another of the industrialists with the name of Shodan, and we know this building now as Shodan House. And the third, which is the mill owners building. Now, of course, this is not a residential building, but in terms of scale, it has that residential scale. So why am I talking about this? If we had a single building to do, it would be open to lots of innovation. When you've got 3 buildings to do for people that are very tightly knit, and you're trying to be innovative, the faith in the future, and you're this architect from France who's already pretty innovative, but here he's put on spot to be innovative, even more. It creates a dilemma. How innovative do I become with this project, not to overrule the neighbor, because they're all talking to one another, right? So there is, in my view at least, there is a kind of background of trying to work on these 3 projects at the same time. The Sarabhai House, as you can see, it's a low house, very horizontal. It has a set of parallel walls. You can see it on the table, I think, right around there. A set of parallel walls that are all brick, bearing walls, with concrete arches for a roof. Space is directional. You can't cross this way except when he opens it up. The Shodan House is the opposite. It's cubic, lots of carvings, as you can even see from this image, carvings that are vertical, go around the corner, and so on. This is this building. It has 2 parallel brick bearing walls. It's cubic, more of the scale of Shodan, but structurally is much closer to Sarabhai than to Shodan. So you can see that he's kind of playing with these 3 projects, that they were not unique projects on their own, but he was thinking, okay, I'm doing this here, I'm doing this. So there is a kind of filter, I would say. So that was my third ghost of these 3 buildings. Ghost 4 are drawings. So I'm going to walk with you through a set of development drawings from his office. So in his proclamations, Le Corbusier always said that when I get information about a building, when I'm commissioned a building, I keep everything in here. Like he talked about the brain as a kind of container where you can shove a lot of stuff in it, and it will just simmer. It will brew. Stuff will brew in there for a while. He said, I don't make sketches. Just let it sit in there. And then suddenly, there is this moment of genius, and the stuff gels together and comes out. And there it is, right? So this was his explanation of his method of working, which is, to some degree actually true, but not completely. Like he really highlighted this half of it because it was like genius, but he didn't really talk too much about the other half. So I want to talk about the other half. So that's the first, and they're all dated. March 7th, 1952. That's the first set of drawings that were drafted. Like there are sketches before this, but this is the first set that was drafted, and I have a list of things here that I want to talk about. First is geometry. The plan shape is close to a square, but it is not a square. Structure. wall, wall, column, column, wall, right? So there are, and here it's all mixed up. You don't see any of the columns here. You don't see columns here. You see those 4 columns. The column wall, which is where we see columns, kind of mixed. Sometimes they're absorbed by walls, sometimes they're independent. Anyway, ramp and stair. Stair in the volume. If you look at this plan and you look at really any multi-story building that has a set of stairs in it, looks the same, right? A set of stairs looks almost like a fire stair. So in the volume. Ramp also starts outside and ends in the volume. Elevator appears as a figure. That's the ground floor. Figure, figure. All 3 floors, elevator is a figure. And bathrooms. Ground floor, second floor, figures. First floor tucked in with walls, so you actually don't notice what they are until you open the door and you're in them. Brise-Soleil. Not a separate element. If you know Chandigarh, this is an exact copy of Chandigarh. Like this is what he was working on in Chandigarh, this very shape of handrail and so on. So first iteration of the building. And we'll look at iterations and just, I want you to see the development, but also through examining these developments, I want to make certain points about what mattered to him and what things he struggled with constantly. Here's the same plan with furnishings, a little bit larger. And you can see in section that there was a kind of cantilever in the east side, that's the river side, a cantilever on the east side, but not one on the west side. And the first few drawings, that's north, that's just the way he drew them, and I'm just presenting them like that, and then we'll switch to north up. So that's north, that's east, that's towards the river, that's towards the city entrance, west, east. And that is the sketch from 10th of March. So that first set was from the 7th, literally a few days later. And you can see a volume, has a corner, distinct shape, the stuff from Chandigarh, open, mostly on that side, with the ramp. Sixth of May, almost 2 months. West, east, now drawings have flipped. And we're going to look at them like this. North is up, that's south, river, city. So you come in, ramp, all of that, stair, still inside the building, elevator, right? I mean, look, he didn't draw much, right? Made sure the elevator is drawn because it was a figural thing. There was a figure in the plan. He wanted this thing to be read like a thing. Stair. And that's the cafeteria. The 2 bearing walls on the sides, but still we see this cantilever situation where the Brise-Soleil is. June 5, another month goes by. The whole plan flips, right? All of this stuff was on the upper half. Now it's down here, right? Let me go up. Right? Here, everything was on that half of the building, and then it flips this way. So it flips. Cafeteria moves down here. Ramp, stair, still all encapsulated inside the building volume. Columns, columns. Look at these. So, like these are sketches, right? And he's thinking structure. Shear wall. These 2 work for shear on the east-west direction, here and here. But the building doesn't have any walls in the other direction because he wants the building open to the river. He wants you to start at the street and just go straight through the building to the other side, almost like the Sabarmati. I'm sorry, almost like the Sarabhai house, right? That you walk in and you just go straight through. So he's got to figure out how to keep this building from racking sideways. Shear wall, and then he adds these two walls on the north. Thinking about structure, right? Bathroom. And look at the elevator. So we're going to look at maybe like 15 different versions of this elevator. So there's a shear wall, and the elevator is separate from the shear wall. The ramp, you walk up, and you've got this concrete wall straight in front of you, right? You're as if you're pushing into the building. Literally, if you think about it as a kind of push, as action, reaction, you're pushing that space into the building, and it pushes this wall here. The elevator is a kind of thing. It's there, moves around, right? It's a figure. That's a figure. That's a figure. That's a figure. That's a figure, right? So he's really working on this notion of the figure. Sorry about this almost illegible. The other ones were real images from the foundation. This one is from a book I copied because I couldn't get this one. So this is June 31. It's 3 weeks after the previous drawing we looked at. Ramp stays, the stair moves out. Right here, stair was in. Oh, sorry. What happened? Here, the stair was in the volume, like a normal stair in a building. And he pulls the stair out. The stair is out. It is suddenly a figure. It's a thing, right? It's a piece of sculpture. So as I go, you gradually see that he's really sculpting this building. And he is, piece by piece, trying to make figures. Like everything is a figure. I want the elevator to be legible. I want the shear wall to be legible. I want the stairs to be legible. I want the ramp to be legible. I want the structure to be legible. You have 150 models here, and I'll show you a couple of well-known houses where he didn't do any of that, right? So we might kind of in the abstract think that Le Corbusier was really wedded to this kind of purity, but in fact he wasn't. Like in early projects, what he was after was a kind of formal clarity. Like forms had to be clear. Structure didn't have to be precise. He used structure without a doubt, like Maison Domino, all of you know, this is all about structure. But in the buildings, it was a little bit of twisting room. But here he was like pushing hard to get to that level of precision and clarity of all of these bits and pieces. July 1, literally a couple of days. Elevator. 2 shear walls. He's pointing the elevator that way, like let's move the elevator up. Right? So here you come up and you're in front of this, but the elevator kind of hangs out of that zone. It's out here. So you've got a figure of the bathroom, the shear wall, the elevator. So he's thinking, can I sustain so many figures in one space? He's like, okay, let's push it in. July 27, a little bit later. Still, elevators out, shear wall, elevator. Something else happens. So these bathrooms, which you've seen them in different forms and shapes from the very inception. They've been everywhere. There, there, and there, stacked on top of one another. And you know that, of course, you have to send water up, and the waste comes down, and fumes have to go up. Pretty straightforward mechanics. The stair, still out, but stops here. 2 days later, July 29, we're still struggling with this. Right? Still elevator. And there are other weird things happening here. He's introduced a set of brise-soleil on the south of the building, introduced a bunch of small openings the south of the building. There was no brise-soleil in the south before. South was a blank wall with the exception of one kind of protruding object. October 3rd. So this is a few months later. The elevator and the shear wall become one volume. Right? So there's the front shear wall, there's the back shear wall, and it becomes one with the elevator. He goes back again and separates them, but eventually this wins. So just like he is constantly massaging this back and forth. Should the elevator be a figural element on its own, visible in the space? And eventually, he decides no. We know this today. If you look at plans for any multi-story building, the shear wall and the elevator core are the same thing because it's a tube, it's a structural tube, it resists torsion, resists lateral forces, right? Makes total sense. But it took him a lot of struggling to actually put those together because he really wanted the elevator to be separate, to be legible as a thing when you walk into that space. The other thing to note, columns and walls. If you remember that first, I can go back. So if you remember this one, we had wall, columns. Here we had no columns visible, right? So a total mix between them. Where was I? I think here. So in this version, we have the bearing wall, the brick at the ends, and then every other column is identifiable as a thing, as a figure. We can always see what is structural. So column, separate from the wall, again here. And note that the wall is to the north of the columns here, also there, but we get a very different condition there than we do here. So these are offices, columns. So the only columns that are not visible as round objects, there should be one here. There should be one here, which are really embedded in the shear wall, right? Makes total sense. So all the columns visible. He carefully bends these walls out, pulls them out to make sure every column is legible. Let's look at some earlier examples. Besnus, Vaucresson, I think it's over there, 22. No columns visible. All the columns are embedded in things. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have structure. Of course it has structure, but he wasn't really interested in expressing the structural integrity of this building. He was looking for form. He was trying to really purity of form and movement in the form. This Villa Stein. So we have, this is a large bay, little bay, large bay, little bay, large bay. We see column in the wall, column in the wall. Same thing here. But when we get to the next row, we are missing this one. So of course, works structurally, right? It's probably somewhere in here, but it doesn't have the same kind of purity and exactitude, geometric exactitude that we see at the mill owners. And part of this is, expression, maturity, whatever you want to call it. This one, Villa Savoie. Same thing. In this building, you all know that structure was just paradigm, right? It was so important. Inset from the front and the back, and on the wall, on the two sides. But this doesn't repeat in, because we've got a carport, and we've got a ramp, and we've got things here, and he kind of moves things around. Again, it works structurally, but it doesn't have that kind of purity that he's trying to strive for in the mill owner. So like these columns don't exist here, right? They only exist on the inside. The column that was supposed to exist here doesn't because of the carport, and so on. We could like pick all of these apart, right? So I'm not interested in picking these apart or saying that it's faulty, but just like thinking about how he was thinking as he was working on this building. Went from a place where form making and movement and the shape of movements was so important to him, to a place where he was keenly interested in structure. So these are structural diagrams from October 9. This one, you can see the parallel walls, the two bearing walls. You see the two shear walls and the floating elevator, but every other column is in the right place. Initially, was thinking of beams and girders, as you can see them drawn. The final was, in fact, none of that exists. It's a square shape, round columns, everything's uniform. There are beams crossing one another with slabs on top. So there's nothing is directional. Here, things were directional. And here are two solutions, an earlier solution and a later solution for this large space meeting hall on the second floor. So the meeting hall is shaped like this. So the first instinct is to elongate the structure to meet the meeting hall, the shape of the meeting hall. But then he switches to this one, where the meeting hall sits on the same structural system that everything else. It's kind of a genius, right? And he makes such an amazing space out of it. So what he did, there should be a column right here and a column right there. But he took those two columns out from the meeting hall, which is large going that way, and elevated the beam out of the space. So the beam is actually now on top. This is the beam, and that's the beam that supports a kind of saddleback roof, right? So this is all cantilevered from that beam. That's all cantilevered from that beam, and created an incredible space with lighting conditions that really totally transform everything. So this is the interior of that space. Right? So that's the saddleback. You don't see the beam. The beam is elevated. It's up in there and in here. Right? So even when he had to manipulate the structure, he still abided by the system and kind of made this amazing thing out of it. All right. So here we are, October, and this is roughly the shape of things as he left them. This is the ground floor, columns, column, 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 and so on. Here, if you recall, we looked at the bathroom shapes that on all floors aligned vertically. And we see this thing, and then this bathroom. So this is where the bathrooms are on the upper two floors. And that's the chase for the bathrooms on the upper two floors. But he didn't want to have the bathroom in here, right? He wanted the bathroom to be a figure in this open space. This whole thing is open air and open to movement, right? So he's thinking, okay, I've got to have a figure in that space. I'm going to move the bathroom from here and make it a figure out there. And the consequences, of course, are that you end up with a chase that sits free in this office space, right? And that he had to make another chase here, which, in honesty, I do not know where the fumes go from that bathroom, because there is an open space right above it. So the breezeway is right above it. And of course, you can manage the waste can go down, water is pressurized, but fumes need to do that. So, I've looked at this a lot, but I can't figure out where the fumes go unless they don't go anywhere, right? They just, anyway. So there's a cost here, right? So he's this kind of a mystery individual. He's, at some points, he's so strict about the structure, for example, and how he deals with it, and how it has to be visible, and so on. And then, when it comes to a thing like this, it's totally mechanical, right? You can't make fumes go in another way. He says, okay, it's more important to deal with this form. I need to have this object in the middle of the space, and he does it. All right. I'm getting there. Don't fret. So this is the next floor up, a later plan, and you can see still struggling with the elevator. The elevator's moving again. All right, so now I'm on to another ghost. So if you go to the building and you kind of imagine, all right, here's a body of facts. It's here. I can see it, I can measure it, which I did, which any architect who goes there will do. There are things in it which don't necessarily, which are not necessarily decipherable. And it's not decipherable in terms of its history, in terms of changes and so on. So here's an aerial of the river full. And here's the building. Right? I mean, it really sits on the river. Here's an aerial of the river empty, but it's still wonderful. Still a river. Now, this is what you have. So the view that I showed you earlier, let's see if I can, this view. Right now, there's a road at this level. And this has been built out with an entertainment zone. And the new bank of the river is far from here. So this is the entertainment zone. Parties, weddings, bounce castles, you name it, right? Which is, so, and here's the roadway. So that whole garden party thing is gone. That's the river, concrete walkway for people to hang out and so on. Another thing, if you go to the building, you'll see these split air conditioning units everywhere. And you see exposed conduit lighting everywhere. And, I was like, I can't believe that a 1950s building of somebody of this caliber would not have accounted for this. So I dug around quite a bit. This appears only on one drawing that I have found, 6786. There is an air conditioning system, and I'm sorry again about this image, that was here on the first floor between the president and the secretary, another one here between the vice president and the secretary, and a third one here which fed this way and that way. So basically this floor was entirely air conditioned. And in the renovations of the 70s, on the lower floor, Doshi added that's just beautiful, really beautiful air conditioning system, completely stealth. Like you could not figure out how he did it. It's really incredible. And they were evaporative cooling systems. But they didn't maintain them, and at some point it was just easier to put in split units. So there are now split units everywhere. Like, so if you go there and you think, this guy didn't even think about air conditioning, which is in fact not true, because he did. You also see exposed conduit lighting everywhere. I'm like, how could he not have thought about this? You go into these rooms, and they are all of them, have locations for wall, sconce, wall lighting, and switches, junction boxes, all of them have it. So there is a bit of kind of digging to figure out, even when you go to the actual building, you can't rely on it as being fact. You have to like really dig behind it and see what more there was. So that's kind of the conclusion. I don't know if I have a conclusion, only to say that kind of dig deep. I'll show you a few images. So you see here some of the exposed conduit lighting. That's the breezeway as you enter. View of the bathroom with the chase. This is on the first floor, and check this out. That is an actual gap in the floor because this and that are separate. Like they're imagined totally separate. Remember some of the early views that we looked at where the whole building was a kind of monolith? You can see that this is totally in bits and pieces, and each piece has been made carefully legible. Like it has to be legible as brise soleil that's separate from the rest of the building. That's the ramp going up to the main building. The east side, this is a couple of years old, and you know there are planters everywhere, and there's planting that has grown. Okay, I'm going to stop here. That's a view of the top of the stair. I'm happy to answer questions. I know this was a little bit long, and you all have studio, so thank you. And thanks, everybody.
We've got plenty of time for
Please.
questions.
Yeah, thank you. Please. The name of the architect who? B.V. Doshi, D-O-S-H-I. In fact, his name is on every drawing that I showed you. Let me find one. Doshi. He was a Pritzker, who remembers? I think 18, something like that? Yeah. There. I mean, he is a fabulous architect on his own right. Like he started out with Le Corbusier. He's done incredible buildings all around the world, in India especially, and fabulous office. His own office is so beautiful. I went and I met with him. Gentle guy, incredible guy, but also amazing architect. Yes, please.
How did you decide to focus on this specific building out of
the
many?
You know, it's an interesting question. So I've fed on Le Corbusier for many years. I mean, every chance I got, everywhere I would travel a whole day to see a building and so on. This was a building I had not seen. This was, I suppose, a little bit tactical in a way. This is a building that is not documented very well. Up till a few years ago, if you went to the Fondation site and they tell you where you can visit, this building was listed as not visitable. And so I felt like, you know, there is a need to just document, if nothing else. If I did nothing else and was just able to document this building, have clear drawings, photographs, all of that. So it really started initially as just a kind of, okay, this needs to be done and I'm going to do it. And then the more I worked on it, the more I realized the theoretical significance of the building as a later project, not quite late, I mean 54, as a later project of Le Corbusier in context with what he's really famous for, which are the 30s kind of purist works. So that's how it went. I'm not giving you a great answer, but that's the real answer. Yes, please.
So the Palace Assembly Building, wasn't that in Chandigarh also?
Correct, yes.
So why is it not considered, was it, I don't know the date of it off the top of my head, but it was later than these early first 5 commissions?
It took longer. Took longer to build. He was working on all of them at the same time, literally. Like all these commissions, plus Chandigarh, he was working on it. The Chandigarh project just took longer to build. Yeah. I mean, the three in Ahmedabad are just fascinating in terms of comparing these three. Like, you know, you can see that he was thinking about this building when he was designing this one. The relationship is really fascinating. So
That roof detail you have inside, that he had inside of the meeting room, and you see it on the exterior
correct.
of the palace.
Right.
Assembly building, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's stuff that goes around, right? Should we call it quits? Yes? All right, everybody. Thank you.